Welcome to the Get Stuff Done podcast with OMES. It's a podcast where we're able to just take a second here and have a conversation about all the different services that are being provided to Oklahoma. Of course, we have Director of OMES, Steve Harp here. My name's Caden Cleveland, and our guest for this week, everybody, drum roll please, is none other than Steve's boss's boss's boss. So
technically I have two bosses.
Oh, okay, well, okay.
John Budd and Kevin Stitt are both my boss.
And then so she's the boss of your boss.
So I got three bosses.
Okay, there you go, okay. The First Lady of the state of Oklahoma, Sarah Stitt. First Lady, welcome to the show.
Welcome for coming, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here, excited to see what you guys do with this podcast.
Yeah.
I think this is great.
This is awesome. Well, first thing, I want to get something out of the way just immediately. So me and Steve have been debating about this. I need you to be the referee on this, give us a clear ruling. Should we reference you as the First Lady the entire show, or are we okay calling you Sarah? Can you give us some feedback here?
Well, I will tell you, coming into this role, I'm not a very formal person. And where I grew up, we didn't even use Mr. and Mrs. So the whole title thing has been quite new to me. And quite often I hear people saying First Lady, and I'm just sitting there, and then I realize they're talking to me. So honestly, really, whatever you're comfortable with, I'm completely comfortable with Sarah. I answer to Mom pretty much anywhere. I hear Mom everywhere. I'll be in the grocery store and I'll hear Mom, and I'll turn and it's not mine. I answered somebody else's kid. But
that's awesome.
Yeah,
okay.
So I'm comfortable with whatever you are.
Okay, well, Steve wins. Then we can, I guess, proceed calling you Sarah. So
sounds great.
Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So give us a little bit of background real quick. We love the whole purpose behind this podcast is really we just want to take some time and just dive into the people around our state who are in public service and are serving Oklahomans, and we just want to learn more about you and what you have going on. So let's start with the more about you aspect of it. Can you kind of give us some background on, we know the First Lady, but can you give us some background before that, whenever you guys were still in the private sector?
Yes. Well, first of all, I grew up in Oklahoma. I'm a lifelong Oklahoman.
Okie. There we
Actually, I'm a lifelong Tulsan until I moved here about a year ago. So Kevin likes to remind me how much I dislike change. So anyway, I'm a lifelong Oklahoman. My parents grew up here. So I'm really entrenched in this state. I love our state. I love raising our family here. Mm-hmm. Early on in my marriage to Kevin, we discussed, should we move, away from our families, away from our state to start kind of on our own?
Right.
And we ended up starting our own business. And when we did, it's really nice to be in communities where you're known, especially he started in the mortgage business. So he did, my parents' mortgage, his parents' mortgage, every friend my parents knew, every friend his parents knew, and that really got us started. So once we established here in Oklahoma and Tulsa, we didn't leave. So we began to raise our family here. Like I said, we started our business here, multiple different businesses, but Gateway was the one that really really had the most success and what we really was kind of our flagship, and grew our company here, have started raising our 6 kids here. And so we just love Tulsa. We love Oklahoma City. We love Oklahoma.
Man, you guys.
Is this thing on? 6 kids. Just want to make sure everyone heard that.
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yes, well, I will say 6 kids. People say, wow, you have 6 kids. You look so young or whatever. But I'm telling you, every day I feel it. I do not feel young anymore. And we have a wide range. So having, a nearly 20-year-old and a 6-year-old,
right.
Your life is very different when you're parenting a, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old than when you're parenting a 6-year-old. Mm-hmm. And Kevin often reminds me, we still have a 6-year-old. And because I have over the years stopped sweating the small stuff,
right.
But my older kids remind me, Mother, you should sweat the small stuff.
I don't have any kids, but that's got to be a little bit of an advantage because, okay, Natalie's your oldest,
yes,
correct?
That's
so
correct.
Natalie, and she's in college?
She is. She's at Baylor.
Okay, and then she's 20?
She will be 20 here.
So is she able to help out with some of the?
Well, she's been back, with COVID longer than she anticipated. She really normally wouldn't be home in the summer at all. And so she's come back in, and she has a lot of advice for me on my parenting and how I've
She's educated now.
Yes, I do think I was, quite young with my older couple especially, and we were building Gateway. I was actually working a ton, and I think I was relatively strict and somewhat legalistic with my older children, and I have slid to the opposite side of the spectrum. So my middle girls remind me, Mom, we always, were dressed properly and all of that. And this morning I left with my youngest one dressed like the Cat in the Hat characters with like a robot arm on and an axe, a fake axe sticking out of the back of him. And I went to my meeting with him like that. And so I think I've slid. So all my kids have some parenting advice for me, my older children. But what you learn as you get older is maybe the things that you hyper-focused on aren't as big picture important. However, as Kevin, often reminds me, we still have a 6-year-old. Like, we still need to be intentional, and you want your children to have this same level of intentional parenting, but it gets harder when you get older.
Man, I can feel that. I've only got 3 kids. My oldest always talks about how my youngest, Jenna, has it made.
Yes.
You have no idea what Mom and Dad put me through. And,
right. Broke them
the
in.
rule. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Jillian broke, me and Jody in, and it's just kind of funny to see Jenna get all this. And my middle is, my son, is easy going, but they always team up on Jenna.
Right.
Like Ethan had as easy going as anyone, but they're always teaming up on her.
Right. That's how it is, and I think that's just the age-old argument in families, large or small.
Right.
The oldest kids say their life was so hard, and the youngest say theirs was easy, or vice versa. So, but
it gets better because, at least for me, so mine are 22, 19, and 17.
Okay.
And they now get along pretty well. So
that's great.
It has been great. Yeah.
That's the one thing, we have such a large family, and that's what Kevin and I have always talked about. We want our children to have relationships, so as they get older and have their own families, they all have a relationship together. But sometimes you wonder, because I feel like all I do most of the time, especially during COVID, is referee. I mean, no one gets along with anybody right now. So
how do you guys manage this, though? So I obviously knew Sarah and Governor Stitt at Gateway, and that was enough, just running a massive company, right? You turn that around until you get in the state government, you show up. I mean, he's always gone. You've got your own platforms. I mean, how do you guys manage the family life, the kids? How do you get time?
Well, I think initially when Kevin introduced this idea to me of what he was thinking about doing and running for governor, and I mean, you've known Kevin for a long time, I really knew my life was going to change, even when he just first told me about it. But the thing that I love about Kevin, which he has touted from the very first time we were married, is priorities. And so he said, if we do this and are successful, our priority is always our family. It always takes precedence over everything else. And he has never wavered from that. And so even though the campaigning was, I'll tell you, literally 18-hour days, super long, Kevin always prioritizes his family. And I just had a conversation with someone today saying, I've seen a lot of families in government, and I've never seen a dad really plug in that's in state government to their kids and not want to miss, their t-ball games and their baseball games. So with him setting that precedence, it gave me a lot of freedom when I stepped into this role of saying, okay, that's fine. I do want to use my influence for good for the things that are on my heart. However, our family takes precedence. Wow. For me, I have to watch that with myself. I'm a very all or nothing person. And so just finding that margin and figuring out how to balance with 6 kids. And I don't think I have the capacity. There's high capacity individuals. Kevin is one. I am not. And so I really have to kind of guard myself. And Lauren, my chief of staff.
Yeah, shout out to Lauren.
Yeah,
yes, shout out
she's
to Lauren.
Back there,
up in Studio 38.
She's the one that says, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to take on another thing? And so she does a really good job because she's known us for a long time, and she knows that that's a weakness, is saying yes.
That's awesome.
But really just going back to our priorities. And we have to revisit that a lot because you could do something every single night, all day long. And for me, the trouble is because I'm not from a political family or political background, I don't know what's important. So it's really important to surround yourself with people that do know, what if you have 25 different invitations, some of those you really probably do need to go to. So trying to prioritize those things and be strategic, and definitely have made a ton of mistakes along the way. But again, it goes back to those priorities and just recognizing and revisiting and remembering that our family, government is wonderful. This is a phenomenal opportunity. But in the long run, when I'm 98 years old or 95 years old, I want to know that my children and my grandchildren, that pass down that family perspective and that priority perspective.
So where's your passion now? So I know a little bit when you came into this, mental health's always been important to you. Kind of walk us through where your passion lies today and what kind of things you're trying to stay involved in.
Well, so early on in the campaign, people would say, well, what's your platform going to be? Well, I don't even like that word, platform. I think it sounds kind of ridiculous. I look kind of like impact. What's your impact going to be? And I had thought long and hard about it, and I have just a really core belief that everything you've walked through in your life can be used for good or bad in your life and the lives of others around you. And so even if it's a difficult situation, if you look at it with that perspective, like, what can I learn from this? What can change me in this? What can I change about this? Then you can take bad, hard, difficult circumstances and turn it for good in your life.
Right.
And so as I began to really think through being in this position, and I didn't really let my mind go there much on the campaign, just because you're so entrenched with just pushing through and all of that. But I knew in my heart that I could use some of my story to impact Oklahomans. And I think so often, I'm guilty of it, we're all guilty of, you look at people that are maybe in the public eye and you think, oh my gosh, their life's been so easy, I wish I had it like that. But honestly, I didn't come from a background like that. I came from a difficult background, and my parents struggled with mental health and drug addiction. And those things are not often talked about. And so when I was on the campaign, I had people start to ask me that, and I thought, gosh, mental health is really, really important to me, but that's also something you don't talk about often in public. And I just decided, I thought, you know what, I'm going to use the time that I'm on, even if it doesn't go past the campaign, I'm going to use this time wisely to impact and try to share what the little that I know or have experienced with mental health and addiction issues, so people can see that it's every walk of life. And so as I began to say every single time that was posed to me on the campaign trail, and I said, I really want to impact mental health. I have mental health issues in my family that I've dealt with my whole life, and I don't want that to be the standard. It's been so difficult, and I want to change the way Oklahoma looks at mental health and addiction issues. Every single time I had someone, it didn't matter if I was in an elderly crowd or a younger crowd, if I was in rural Oklahoma or urban Oklahoma, every single time someone would take me afterwards to the back of the room and they would whisper in my ear and say, I'm part of that community, or my son or my dad or my mother or my grandfather, whatever. And so it began to really strengthen my resolve that using this position to impact some of these really great social issues we have in our state, very big social issues, would be impactful. And what cemented it for me is my mother came up to me probably 8 or 9 months into the campaign, and she said, hey, I've got to tell you, I know what your impact should be and what you should really focus on. And I said, what, Mom? And she said, mental health. And it was really kind of freeing for me, because you do worry when you speak about mental health, the stigma that goes with your family. And my siblings and I have discussed that. It's really hard. Because in the age that we were raised in, mental health was something you did not talk about. And my mother in particular could not get the help she needed, probably because the fear of letting people know, where she was at. And it was not a topic that was discussed much. And it was hidden in secret. Families suffered in silence. Individuals suffered in silence and hid it from their families. And so as I began to really talk about that, I was just shocked by the warm welcome, but also the amazement that people were shocked that I would speak about that. And so I've really focused a lot on that, but bigger spectrum over the last probably 8 months, I've decided to really focus on the hope conversation in our state, because that affects all of these issues.
So walk us through so if I'm understanding correctly, the mental health aspect of that would be a piece of kind of the larger what you're envisioning with the hope aspect. Can you walk through what exactly you mean by what are you talking about when you talk about the hope aspect?
So the hope aspect is, and there are a lot of studies that are becoming more widely renowned, and honestly, we have some of the greatest hope work being done here in our state by Dr. Chan Hellman and through OU. And so as I began to look at are, wanting to focus on mental health and addiction. And then you look at our state, and Kevin keeps talking about being a top 10 state. And then you look at these issues that we're struggling with, education and really incarceration rates. We were one of the largest incarcerators of women in the nation, in the world. And then you look at the foster care because of that. That's all linked together. And the addiction. And most of these things, not most, but a lot of these things are generational cycles.
Oh, yeah.
So you look at incarceration, you look at poverty, you look at addiction, you look at mental health. These are generational cycles that you literally have to reach in and pluck people or give them a different path. Because if everything you always knew, and in fact, I just had a conversation with a young man to kind of skip back. He said he was talking to me about some of the race issues and incarceration. And he said, I literally accepted as a young man that you go to jail. At some point in your life, you're going to go to jail. And even with the background that I had with addiction and mental health, I didn't automatically assume I was going to spend time in jail. And he said, just in my community where I grew up, everybody assumes at some point in your life, you go to jail. And that really started me thinking again about just the hope path and how you can break that cycle. If all you know is that at some point in your life you're going to be in jail, how can you ever dream bigger than that? How can you ever think about a career path to a VOTEC or a college, because you're in the back of your mind, at some point, I'm going to spend some time in jail. Because every adult you've ever known, mother, father, uncle, aunt, whatever, has spent time in jail. That's all you know.
So how do you give them the hope? Because I think that's fascinating. Because usually it takes someone crossing their path, crossing their face,
exactly
that has a different message for them, a different way.
To show them, right?
100%. So that's fascinating. So how, Sarah, in that description of hope, how do you envision that playing out for people either in mental health or... So I will say, one of the first things I did in state government, I was still at Gateway, and Kevin appointed me to the Board of Corrections when he became governor. And then I was fortunate to become chairman of that board for a while. And if anyone out there is interested, you should reach out and become a volunteer for the DOC, because there's a lot of great people, volunteers and or correctional officers and or administration staff handling a myriad of issues in our prisons, both for female and males. But at the same time, it will be eye-opening in terms of the chain you just lined out in terms of prison, mental health, foster care, and other things. It's crazy how this stuff is linked, and there's a lot of people fighting that fight. But the people that are actually going to jail, how do you? For hope, it's pretty easy. It seems like for in a lot of ways for people to end up desperate. Just with no hope, with no direction. So how do you marry those two things up?
Well, that goes back to those generational cycles. And as a state, we have fallen victim to accepting that that's where we're at, that we're going to have the highest incarceration rates. We're going to have, so you began to live a lifestyle without hope. Now you have, the upper few that, the business leaders and that, but they don't have that. But the good portion of our population is living a life that is void of hope. And so as I began to try to really, and I didn't have that hope message yet, but I was trying to get my mind around, it's not just mental health, it's not just incarceration, it's all linked together in these generational cycles. How do we break people out of? Because I feel like I broke out of generational cycles, and I counted myself lucky, and I never really, for me, my faith is the biggest aspect of why my life is the way it is, but I never was able to put my finger on, is that something someone's born with? Is that something you can teach? How do you go into these areas of people that are suffering from any one of these issues and say, no, there's a way out? How do you teach that? Can you teach that? And so I came across, it was either towards the end of the campaign or right after Kevin was elected, a friend of mine gave me this book on hope. And she goes, you have to read this. This is your story. This is what you've been trying to put together. And so I didn't read it right away. And eventually I picked it up, and it captured everything that I couldn't even really kind of formulate into a thought process. Basically, it's by Dr. Chan Hellman and Dr. Casey Gwynn. And basically, they are saying, they have done a ton of scientific research, that hope is a teachable thing. And hope is basically the ability that you think you can make your life different than it is today. You have the ability to do that. And so they have a ton of scientific data, but it basically shows how you can take a child in a more of a desperate situation, and you can teach them how to set goals. You can teach them pathways out of where they're at, and even these generational places that they've been in, you can teach them pathways out. You can teach them how to set goals. You can teach them hope. You can teach them, and hope is not just this inherent feeling that life is going to get better. Right. Hope is an actual pathway out of a situation. And so I think if we embrace that thought process and we go to our school systems, we go to our business community, we go inside state government, we go within our correctional facility, and we begin to teach the science of hope. Right. And it's very basic, because to someone like me who did not grow up thinking they could go to college, did not grow up thinking there was a life out of what they had, you have to be taught it very basically, which sometimes sounds crazy to someone who maybe had parents that said, you can be all you can be, take every opportunity. When you don't have that, you don't know that inherently. Right. Now, there's always the people that just have something inside them that they can fight through any sort of adversity and get out on the other side. But I think as a state, if we go across our state in business community, inside our prisons, within the walls of our prisons, within our school districts, within state government, everywhere, within our communities, if we go community by community and say we are going to spread this message of hope, here's your toolkit to do that, I believe that is what's going to impact those generational cycles and impact the next generation of our state.
Knowledge is power. So the truth, awareness is power. So a lot of these kids, specifically young people that aren't worried, but even adults that grew up in this, all it takes is awareness of these opportunities and then finding a way to give them, inspire them in a way that they want to move that direction.
Right. I'm so glad you talk about all the different silos, because I think in the past the thinking is, we have to do something about overcrowding in prison systems, right? And that's the silo that we focus on. But you're exactly right. It's a whole chain effect. It's a domino effect. All these different things affect each other, from DOC, mental health, our education system. Everything you're talking about is one conversation.
I do want to shout out to Director Scott Crow at DOC.
Yes.
He does a heck of a job.
He really does.
And I was fortunate to be on the board when we made a change of directors, and he's done nothing but phenomenal work. And I don't know if Oklahomans know him very much or his profile, but that guy is much like Governor Stitt. He always works. I mean, his mind's always cranking. There's always something he's trying to perfect or a problem he's trying to solve. And Scott Crow's impressive. He's an impressive
He's
servant.
making a huge impact in that aspect of our state, and it goes back to what you said. So often we focus on like this one data point, like, okay, overcrowding in prisons, instead of rewinding it all the way back and going back and going, okay, we have people jumping off the bridge. We can stand there and keep them from jumping off the bridge, but how about we go all the way back to how did they get to that point? And I know he has kind of that mindset, and he's taken that in, and he sees big picture of wanting to impact the future, and he is just doing a great job within that department.
So as far as specifics go, and like your vision of what you have for implementing hope, we talk about how this is a conversation for really a whole bunch of different areas within state government. Is there something, a specific project that you're working on that each of these agencies are focusing on, or is it really just a culture thing? Can you kind of walk us through that?
Well, you can break it down. Really, the great thing about the hope message is it doesn't just apply to some of these great issues. You can take it in your company. Like
that's a good point.
I kind of thought about it like if I was still at Gateway, I would take this message throughout Gateway just to strengthen the families that work there at Gateway. But I will say one impactful thing when you look at some of these bigger statistics like the incarceration, foster care, addiction, all of those, poverty. The one thing that the hope message really talks about is one meaningful relationship can change the life of a child, can change the life of a young woman that is now in prison. Her kids are in foster care, and she has someone coming into that prison that is pouring into her. That literally can be the hinge pin to change her. And so that's where I would encourage all the people that maybe don't find themselves in those desperate situations. You maybe think, I can't be impactful, but I am just telling you, I can name 2 or 3 relationships in my life as a child that literally were probably the shift for me to not go down the path that I could have.
How young in your life did you come across those people?
I would say probably like 10 or 11 were some of the and my dad also was a huge piece of my life. Even though he did struggle, my dad I always knew that he loved me and he wanted what was best for me, and he worked his hardest with the small amount of resources he had to provide that. But there were people outside that impacted me, that showed me what life looked outside of my home, which was a big deal.
Do you find that in your travels, back on mental health for a minute, that people tend to self-diagnose themselves? So those that are struggling, they can't get the answers, they can't get the medical advice, or they can't get their family to buy in. I mean, Google's available now, and I mentioned this because I have some of this in my own family, and it's been a journey for sure. And myself, my ex-wife, we're just kind of learning some of this currently. But it's been fascinating how much of information is available and where people are self-diagnosing themselves.
Yes.
And then in some cases, they self-medicate themselves as well, which drives a whole other chain, which gets it even, at least from what we've seen, it makes it difficult. I'm just curious what maybe you've seen.
Well, I mean, that aspect, goes into, our prison population. A lot of our prison population are people that are addicted, but they've been self-medicating because of an underlying mental health issue that has not been addressed. So I would say, back when I was little, mental health, you didn't have Google, you didn't have WebMD, you didn't have all of those things. And people did self-diagnose, but they did it without the help of their family, because when you are struggling with an undiagnosed mental health issue, you don't really have the perspective because the illness is in your mind. And it's really hard to have perspective to know what's wrong with you. And you couldn't, back then, there was such a stigma with talking about things like that. You didn't want to talk about, schizophrenia or bipolar, or any of these things that have become a more common language nowadays. So I think we have come a long ways with that. However, there is that trap because you still feel that judgment when you talk about mental health, whether you're struggling with it personally or it's a family member. There is now, with the resources we have online, to self-medicate or self-diagnose. And I would really always recommend having a healthcare professional walk you through that. The issue is with mental health, if I have a broken arm and I go into the ER, they're going to send me to an orthopedist, and you might get slightly differing opinions if you went to two doctors, but basically they're going to set your arm.
For the most part, you may need cast, right?
You might need surgery, but there's a concrete diagnosis to heal you. With mental health, that is the void. There's not it's not a one size fits all. It really is specific to that individual, their chemical makeup, their family makeup, the support they have.
100%,
so medicine is not always just okay, here, take this pill and now you're better now. You're not going to struggle with these things.
It's environmental.
It's environmental. And I really believe a lot of it is genetic. And so also finding how you respond. And we have come so far in pharmaceuticals that really don't just, I remember back years ago, my dad would say things because we worked with a lot of people with mental health issues, and the drugs that were available then really just doped you up, and you couldn't really communicate and interact with people in a normal way. It's not like that now. So there's great pharmaceuticals that really help balance the chemical imbalances in your brain and help you function to your highest level. But support, being open, feeling like you're in an environment that people aren't going to judge you at work, your family, and you still struggle with families when you're going across generations, that stigma is really hard. And so, I know in my family, if one of my kids were to come and say, I am struggling with these issues, because I'm sensitive about mental health, I definitely would address it. But people, even from my generation, go, whoa, that's not wrong with you. Don't be telling people that. And so I think we have to be really careful that we actually look at mental health as brain health.
Tell us a little bit about, are your kids, and like your older children, are they passionate about any of these things that mom's chasing or that you find passion around?
Well, I think, you can't, it would be very easy if you could do across-the-board parenting. My life would be easier if I could just say no to every child on this issue. So each kid, but early on, even before we had a larger family, I wanted each of my kids to really connect with their passion. And I believe each person is made with something that they're specifically designed for. And so it's been neat to see and you kind of are at that age, you're seeing your kids kind of launch on their own, and you begin to see all of the different things. It may not be anything you're ever interested in, but my oldest child several years ago began working at a camp for people with disabilities. And I never would have pegged her as that growing up. She's very typical oldest child, very driven, very, me focused and all of that. But she worked one summer when she was 12 or 13 and just got hooked. And she has a big passion for people that have physical limitations, mental limitations, and just really impacting that community. And she's just now starting, her college career. So who knows where that will take her. But seeing that and her passion, which is not something that I've ever focused on or even really exposed her to, and it was just kind of chance, and seeing her grab onto that. And I will say my older two children always have a heart for people that don't have opportunity. And my son in particular, even though he's this big, outdoorsy kid, right, he'll be the kid that will give whatever money he has to the guy on the street. And he's played a big role with me in helping with my parents. And, so he is always the one that he just has a heart for people that are struggling. So I love seeing that because I think as Americans, we've developed this me first mentality, and we forget to pick up our heads and look around us. Yeah. And so often we're not happy. I don't like when people say, "Are you happy?" Because to me, happiness is a feeling. Mm-hmm. And we're not happy if, whatever, our tire gets flat today or whatever, but really picking our head up, and really where you get that sense of fulfillment, not happiness, is when your life is making an impact. But so often we get drowned in our own situation and we forget to look around us and see where we could actually impact someone else. So I think all of my children, as they get older, you see little sparks of interest. And it's neat with my older two because they're now, basically adults, and they're getting to kind of work that out. But I think if we can encourage our children in this society we have in America, and I think during COVID, people have started to be less me-focused and have to look around. So there's good things that have come out of this. But we have to teach our next generations of Oklahomans to look around.
So I had a quick question for you on kind of back on the support system of the conversation we were just having. And one thing that I really appreciate about Governor Stitt that he's really pushed for is the interaction between public service and private service, mm-hmm, and how you can intertwine those two things. And I think it's a part of the same conversation of talk a little bit about, churches and nonprofits and what role do they play in this whole vision you have for bringing a sense of hope to so many Oklahomans?
Well, I think, and Kevin and I fell into this category. We, for so long, mm-hmm, just said, oh, the politicians run the Capitol, they make the decisions for our state. And we were not, and not everybody's like this, mm-hmm, but we weren't active. We were active in our own community, with our company, with our family, where we were. But then once we took that step and that leap into state government, what we began to realize is stuff cannot be siloed. It's all Oklahoma. And I think for so long you silo your communities. You have your religious community or your church community, and then you have state government, and then you have your business community. And that's where I think we have fallen into this rut of this is why we have these big issues. So I think we need to do, and I am seeing a ton of people step out and raise their hand and say, I will step out of the private sector, or I will step out of the religious sector, and I'm going to come and serve in state government to try to breach those lines. And it's really hard, though, when you have, tens of years doing it this way. But I believe in order for our state to be a top 10 state and for us to really bring success in a really well-balanced, bright future for the next generation, we have to all work together. Yeah. And I think Oklahoma has a really unique opportunity. We're really primed. We were at the bottom of things we shouldn't be and at the top of things we shouldn't be. But what we have here is we have people that want to make a difference in their state. And we don't have people that are just going to move out when when the going was tough. We have people that say, we want our state to not be the bottom. Yeah. We want to be a top 10 state. We want to change for the next generation, and we need to offer a bright hope and future. And we have great, natural resources in our state. We're positioned in the middle of the country, so we have a great geographical location. We're one of the larger states land-wise. We have a great population. I think we have so much to offer here. We just have some logistical things, and that really comes with working together and owning our state and not pointing fingers. And it's working across party lines. It's working across rural versus urban. It is looking at Oklahoma and saying, we want to have a bright hope and future. And really, honestly, if we put the stake in the ground and say, this is what we deserve as Oklahomans, it will change it for the next generation.
And we've kind of already seen the change. Yes. In our last episode, we talked to Justin Brown about Be a Neighbor.
Oh, yeah.
And
Be a Neighbor,
that's
great
just
platform.
One simple, quick, you could go down a whole list of examples of things that have been implemented, but where he talked a lot about partners and about what huge impact they play in that whole system. But, that's just one example of this concept of hope and implementing it being enacted. So.
Well, I think during COVID, even before COVID started, it's been interesting to see how many people are willing now to sign up for state service. You get into COVID, now you have more people at home, they can't get out, and they have a lot more time to get educated and read. And I think people are more willing. They have a little bit more time in their hands now, and they're willing to sign up and do things. I will say, so I've only been in state government for 9 months. And during this time, how many people that you didn't realize that like your agency or the agencies touch, and OMES is a background agency, right? So we're back there just helping those who actually serve Oklahomans. But it's interesting, Justin Brown, we've talked to Kevin Corbett, who's running OHCA, ODVA, Director Joel Kinzel. When you talk, go sit in I'll give you an example. One thing I think has changed significantly in state government that's been interesting, when we first showed up, there was a lot of finger pointing. It was everyone was someone else's fault. I can't get my job done because of this other agency. And OMES was at the center of a lot of that. But it's funny, and Director Kinzel will remember this. Joel's a great partner of OMES, but OMES sits in the middle of all this, so everyone could point a finger at us. But so my dad was a veteran. When we lost my dad about a year and a half ago, but he was a vet, and I sat down and waiting on Joel. I was a little bit early, and there was a couple of vets sitting there and families, and they were mad, like they were angry about the lack of service in their mind that they were getting from ODVA. And the truth is, if you go behind the curtain, there's a lot of great people at ODVA. Seriously, they do great work, but everyone's got work to do. So I sit down with Director Kinzel, and we're talking, meeting for the first time. And I brought that up. I said, hey, I'm just sitting in your lobby, and these people are upset. And I had an opportunity to sit there and just start, these suckers, and you should demand this and that. I'm like, instead I said, how do I help you fix that?
Right.
And I'm not saying OMES is the answer, but I will say DHS is working with SDE, the State Department of Education, better than they ever have.
Yes.
Lots of partnerships that are going on now. OHCA and the Department of Health. I mean, you're starting to see all these, and Governor Stitt's kind of driven this in terms of it doesn't matter what your agency is, you just fill gaps. Find a way to solving problems and getting the outcomes that we need. Yeah. That's been super cool.
And I think that's the key. And I think, in private business, you're outcomes driven. So if something doesn't work, if you're getting a bad result, you change it, because otherwise you cannot stay afloat. In state government, what we've so long done is prop up poor outcomes and continued to grow and grow and grow. And so then you have people that are protective over their silo. They don't work together because they're just protecting their one little thing. Yep. We have to break through those barriers. If we can become like a big picture outcomes based in state government, that will bleed out everywhere, because whether you like it or not, state government is a massive employer in the state of Oklahoma, and we touch the lives of every demographic in every part of Oklahoma. So we have an opportunity within state government to make the biggest impact if we decide to break down those barriers and, like you said, be outcomes based and go, okay, we're not worried about protecting our turf. We want to change the outcome on this thing we're partnering on. And it's a different mindset, and it's extremely difficult to try to break down those barriers, because that's not the way it's been done. But it's a fresh new way of thinking. And if we want to be a top 10 state across the board, if we want to be a hope-centered state across the board, across social issues, across business, across religious, then we absolutely have to do things differently. And that's where it's exciting when I hear you talk, and we are seeing people that are coming to serve that have that mindset.
Yep.
But it's going to take all of us, because as the public, Oklahomans, we have the power to push through with our legislators. We have the power to make change. We just don't realize it. And so if everybody gets on this message of hope and change, and we can be a top 10 state, we can do it. But it takes doing things differently and having an outcome-based mentality.
Yeah, our approach has been we're servants, right? So at the end of the day, OMES is going to be a servant to the 189 agencies and affiliates that we provide services for. So that means, what does it take to get Director Brown successful? What does it take to get, when you think of like Be a Neighbor, for example, when that was launched, that was a dream, I think, of Governor Stitt that got enacted really quick. I think we built that as a partnership with a couple different agencies in a matter of like a month and a half. It was fast. And there's the interesting thing is I also found that there were a lot of great state employees that weren't empowered. And if you just got in there, learned who your people were, found ways of just getting out of their way and letting their ideas surface and letting them chase their passion, next thing you know, bam, you're off and running. Now, there's a lot of work to be done. So, anyone's watching this, I don't want to think we're patting our backs patting ourselves on the back too much. But the truth is, it is exciting right now. There is this wave of change. There are more people willing to partner for the right outcomes. So that's been interesting. I think over the next year, it's going to be cool to see, hear the different names as we go through this podcast that we want to bring in, and Oklahomans will hear these stories told. There's Director Brown, bringing him in. So I'll tell you a quick story. When we first got here, OMES wasn't allowed in his building. Basically, he had kicked us out. The relationship was so fractured. We finally got him talked into having a conversation, and after that, things started taking off, and people, similar minds. But definitely, I think it just took two people willing to talk to get things going. I think it's that simple.
It is.
And if we can just get more people doing that, I think we'll be in better shape.
Well, and I think the key to it is politics. This is the one thing that I've learned. You asked to go back to that first question. The one thing that I've learned is politics has become a career. And politics is a very me first, my agenda protecting of what I'm doing. And we cannot operate successfully in big picture for our state if that's our policy. And when you begin to bring people from the outside sectors, from the business sector, the religious sector, inside of state government that don't have that mentality, and honestly, there's great people in politics, but if that's your goal and that's where you've been raised, you don't know any differently. We have to bring that fresh perspective that it's relational and there is a bigger picture. It's not about just you. It's about a future for the next generations of our state.
I will say this, during this last session of the legislature, some things were contentious at times, but I can't be more of a fan of the House, the Senate, the Attorney General, and some others because they've been great partners. I can't do my job without them.
Right.
And
that's right.
And with everything that was going on, it was great to see, regardless what was out in the paper, regardless of some of the bills that passed, bills that didn't pass, they were always great partners of us. So where I think some of those walls are starting to break down to where you can compartmentalize an issue and it doesn't have to be personal.
That's right.
And then, it doesn't affect all your decisions on everything else.
Right.
And we're getting better at that.
I completely agree.
That's right.
So I see Lauren standing up. I was like,
Must be time to
I think
go.
we're getting a yank.
Well, First Lady, thank you so much for just taking the
Absolutely.
time to sit down with us.
Thank
It's been extremely educational and awesome just learning more about your vision, everything that you have going on. And I hope soon that we can have you back again.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll add another mic and have Lauren. You've gotten enough shout outs in this. So I think Lauren should probably sit next
Most
and we'll
likely.
introduce her into this as well.
Yes.
But we just want to check back in and learn more about it as well. So
I would say when you're on the trail on any of these things you're passionate about, if there are heroes or warriors that you want to bring back and let them tell their stories, we're definitely open to that for
100%.
sure.
Absolutely. Well, I've met, that's the great thing about this position.
Yeah.
Whether you like public life or not, you meet the most phenomenal people out of our state. You meet the people that have sacrificed everything they have to make lives different for others. And that's really a passion. You know, Kevin's vision is a top 10 state, and he's a visionary and a goal-oriented. And really we're great partners because my vision is a better Oklahoma for the next generation. And I really believe this hope message is the thing that is going to make an impact. But the people that I have met that have done so much just behind the scenes, you wouldn't even know, within the walls of prisons, that have impacted lives like no other. It is amazing. And I am humbled every day when I meet these people that have made sacrifices and have made it their life mission to make an impact on a lot of these social issues in our state, to make a difference in our state. It's exciting because then when you meet those people, it's not discouraging. You look at these huge, different data points and you go, oh my gosh, how could we ever get out of those? But when you meet the people across our state that are passionate about these issues, with the right, really working together and with the right mindset, we will overcome a lot of these obstacles and we will make a brighter hope and future for our state.
Sarah, thanks again for coming. We really appreciate you making time for this. I know you're busy.
My pleasure.
Yeah. We'll see you soon.
Well, thank you so much again for coming by. And if you're listening at home or at work, we just want to thank you again for listening to the Get Stuff Done podcast. Tune in. We'll have the next episode coming out soon, and I guess we'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.